Open the damn gate! This is my house!
My nephew Tyler, 16, was crunching Lucky Charms on the back deck when he suddenly shouted, "Uncle Jake, you've got to see this right now!" I was out in the heat, sweating as I clipped back the hedges, and turned to see him frozen with this mix of disgust and shock. He held his phone away from himself like it was toxic. "It's Melissa," he whispered. "Your wife." I put down the clippers and took the phone. On the screen was my wife of 12 years sitting on messy sheets, damp hair spilling over her bare shoulders, steam clouding the mirror behind her. But it wasn't our mirror, not our bedroom. Some stranger's hairy chest showed up in the reflection, and her face, smug, satisfied, almost proud. The caption under it said only one word: upgrading. No punctuation, no context. It was the look of someone who already wrote herself into a sufferer role and now posed like the hero. That "I've survived so much" expression while she burned everything down. The sheets were luxury cream-colored ones we never owned. The walls had crown molding, artwork I'd never seen, lighting that looked soft and expensive. I stared at it for maybe half a minute. Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside me, mumbling about finishing his cereal inside. The timestamp read 9:12 a.m., barely 3 hours old. I gave him back the phone and walked past the rose bushes Melissa planted in year 3 of our marriage. Through the back door, she painted seafoam green because white is too plain. Down the hallway lined with family photos she forced up long after she'd quit seeing me in them. In my office, behind my grandfather's old roll-top desk, was a drawer I hadn't opened in nearly a year. It sticks in the humidity, but I knew the trick: pull sideways, then lift. Inside sat a plain blue folder. To anyone else, it was blank. To me, it was marked in thick Sharpie, contingency plan. I didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't punch walls or call her. What I felt was something colder, clarity. Something inside me, quiet for years, finally stood up and went to work. Here's what people miss about real revenge. It's not heat or chaos. It's calm. It's signatures at 8:14 a.m. in a government office that smells like bleach and despair. It's stacks of forms most folks never read. It's patience, the long game, while others keep score in the moment. Let me roll back 7 months to show how the door to this plan even opened. Melissa's father, Richard Westbrook, came to me in February with what he called a temporary business arrangement. Richard was the kind of man who wore cufflinks with his initials, drove a leased BMW he bragged he owned, and called his office the War Room, though it mostly held golf trophies and unpaid bills. He was under fire: lawsuits from a bad property deal with a partner, shell companies, shady accounts. The details blurred, but the point was clear. Richard needed to get a valuable estate out of his name while the storm passed. And it wasn't just any estate. The Westbrook property sprawled over 47 acres of lakefront in the Berkshires, appraised at $4.3 million. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, cedar shake roof, guest cottage, private dock, solar panels, even a Swedish hot tub Richard loved to brag about. A piece of generational wealth designed to last. "We need a clean name on the deed," he told me, swirling brandy like a conductor. "Someone in the family, but not tied to the companies. Someone we trust completely." He slid me a thick envelope across his mahogany desk. The same desk where, drunk at Melissa's birthday once, he'd told me, "Jake, you're decent, but you'll never grasp wealth. It's not money. It's legacy." Their lawyer, a thin man with wire glasses who looked straight out of a noir film, had set everything up. On paper, I'd be the owner. In practice, nothing would change. 6 months, maybe less, until it all blew over. "You're not really taking ownership," Richard insisted, topping off his wine with a label he couldn't pronounce. "It's just optics, a legal smokescreen." But after more than 10 years of marriage to Melissa, watching her slowly decide I wasn't enough, I had learned to read fine print. I'd built instincts, and I had started planning for storms that seemed impossible until they weren't. The next morning, I took the papers to my lawyer, Catherine Morrison. She'd managed my grandfather's estate years ago and always billed me less than she could have. Catherine was sharp, careful, and not one to waste words. We sat together for 2 hours, line by line, clause by clause. "Pretty standard," she said as she flipped another page. "But if you want to cover yourself..." We drafted a small addition, half a paragraph buried near the bottom of page 7, right where most people's eyes glazed over. "If a legal separation or divorce occurs between Melissa Ann Westbrook Thompson and Jacob Michael Thompson, Full ownership of the properties listed reverts instantly and permanently to the title holder. All rights of challenge by family members or related heirs are waived. Simple, clean, hidden in the weeds of legal jargon, but obvious to anyone who actually read it. The signing came that Thursday at Westbrook & Associates. Really, it was just Richard's accounting office pretending to be a firm. In the room, me, Melissa, Richard, and their lawyer. On the table, 2 Montblanc pens, a mountain of paperwork, and 3 signatures that would alter everything. When page 7 came up, Melissa barely looked at it before scribbling her name. Her loops grew bigger, the way they always did when she wanted to brush something off. Her mind was already elsewhere, probably her afternoon yoga class or whatever podcast told her she was meant for more than a husband who patched his own roof and drove a dented truck. "Good thing we're not divorcing, huh, Jake?" she joked, her laugh sharp as broken glass. "Otherwise, this would be messy." Richard laughed too, not reading a word. Why would he? To him, I was the working-class son-in-law in off-the-rack jackets who brought beer to wine tastings, grateful just to be allowed at the table. Too dull to notice the fine print. I only smiled back, nodding like I shared the joke. But I wasn't laughing. I was storing the moment in the same mental box where I kept every smirk, every condescending jab, every reminder that I was never one of them. The papers were notarized, copied, and filed. Richard shook my hand like a man convinced he'd beaten the system. "Family takes care of family," he said warmly. "This means a lot to us, Jake." That night, once Melissa had gone to bed with another book about finding your true self, I slipped my signed copy into the basement safe. Not the jewelry safe in the closet everyone knew about. The real one. Hidden behind a panel, fireproof, locked tight. It sat beside another document. The separation agreement I'd had drawn up months earlier but hadn't filed. Sometimes the best plans are the ones you pray you'll never need. For 6 months, nothing looked different. I still mowed lawns and trimmed hedges for other people. Melissa filled her days with self-discovery, pricey workshops, and quotes stolen from Instagram. The Westbrooks kept treating me like background furniture, useful when needed, invisible the rest of the time. Richard mentioned more than once that progress was being made, and things should return to normal soon. But by month 4, Melissa's habits began to shift. Nights out stretched longer. She bought clothes from shops I didn't know. Her phone buzzed nonstop, and she answered right away while leaving mine unread. The changes were small at first, a new gym membership she swore she loved. Costly salon visits she dismissed as just a trim. A sudden craving for downtown restaurants I couldn't pronounce. When I asked about it, she gave me that practiced smile people save for toddlers and loyal dogs. "I'm just growing, Jake. You wouldn't get it." And she was right. I didn't get why someone would wreck a 12-year marriage for strangers' approval online. But I understood contracts. I understood leverage. And I was beginning to see that my plan might not stay in the drawer forever. The morning Tyler shoved his phone in my face, I spent 17 minutes staring into the bathroom mirror. Not from grief. Not from shock. Those had passed months earlier, when I'd found hotel charges and dinner bills for places I'd never been. I stared because I was asking myself one question. Was I really the man who would follow through? Turned out I was. I spent that Saturday like I always did, yard work, small repairs, keeping the house together. But my hands moved with a different rhythm. I clipped the hedges closer than ever, cut out all the dead growth until only strong branches stood, and cleared the gutters with the focus of a man readying for a storm. Monday morning came heavy and damp, the kind of air that makes choices feel less like decisions and more like fate. I pulled on my best jeans, a fresh button-down, and the same leather boots I wore on my wedding day. Not because the courthouse required it, but because I wanted to remember exactly what I was wearing when everything shifted. The county courthouse unlocked at 8. I was already in the lot by 7:45, engine idling, manila envelope on the seat beside me. The separation papers I'd carried for months were finally leaving the drawer. Inside, the family court clerk was a weary woman named Patricia, the sort who'd stamped so many divorce filings that nothing surprised her anymore. She flipped through my stack with the flat tone of routine. "Irreconcilable differences, legal separation, no disputed assets," she read, stamping each sheet. "Goes into effect the moment you file." That's right. Confirmation will be mailed in 5 business days. 23 minutes later, I walked across the street to the county recorder's office, certified copy in hand along with the deed transfer I'd been holding since February. The office sat beside an empty donut shop and a chiropractor pushing same-day spinal fixes. Fitting enough for a place where lives got adjusted for good every day. The recorder's office looked worse than family court. Harsh lights that gave everyone sickly skin, beige walls covered with government slogans, and carpet that had long since quit hiding stains. But here, million-dollar properties changed hands with nothing more than ink and a stamp. Window 3 was run by a woman with tired eyes and the smell of coffee on her breath. She scanned my papers with brisk detachment. "Property transfer under conditional clause," she said, reading from the summary. "Looks complete. I'll need your ID." I slid over my license and the certified separation order. She scanned, checked the signatures, then nodded. "Transfer will be logged within 2 hours. Confirmation will arrive by mail." "Thank you." And just like that, it was sealed. No courtroom speeches, no lawyers sparring, no headlines, just a government worker stamping away the Westbrook family's $4.3 million inheritance and placing it under my name. I sat in my truck in the parking lot afterward, letting the reality settle in. Not the emotional reality. I'd processed that months ago when I'd first started planning this moment. But the practical reality of what came next. Because owning the property was only the first step in a longer plan. By the time I got home, the online property records had already been updated. Thompson Jacob M., sole owner, not hidden in a trust, not buried behind a corporate entity, just my name in bold letters next to a property value that represented more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But money had never been the point. Control was the point. Justice was the point. Making sure that the people who'd spent 12 years treating me like an amusing pet learned what it felt like to be on the other side of a power imbalance. I changed the Wi-Fi password to "read the contract" and waited. Sunday dinner at the Westbrook house was exactly what I'd expected. The entire clan had gathered in their formal dining room, the one with the crystal chandelier and oil paintings of ancestors who'd probably been just as insufferable in their time. Richard presided over the table like a king holding court. Eleanor, Melissa's mother, played gracious hostess despite the obvious tension, and assorted cousins, siblings, and hangers-on filled the remaining seats. The only empty chair was Melissa's, right beside mine. She was presumably still enjoying her upgrade, probably posting more selfies from whatever hotel room had become her temporary kingdom. "Well," Eleanor said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision, "I suppose we should address the elephant in the room. We've all seen Melissa's announcement." Murmurs of agreement around the table. Her brother Marcus, who'd once introduced me to his friends as the landscaper my sister married, shook his head with practiced disappointment. "Honestly, I thought she had more class than that," he said, putting family business on social media like some common influencer. Their cousin Derek, the one with crypto investments that never quite panned out, held up his phone. "I mean, it's got over 3,000 likes. Kind of impressive, actually." Richard set down his wine glass harder than necessary. "What's impressive is the complete lack of discretion. 12 years of marriage, and this is how she chooses to handle things? Publicly humiliating Jake like some kind of reality show contestant." I listened to them dissect Melissa's character, her choices, her social media strategy, all while treating me like a sympathetic sufferer who deserved their pity. The irony was delicious. They were so focused on her betrayal that they'd completely forgotten about their own. "I suppose you'll be filing for divorce soon," Eleanor said, giving me the kind of maternal look that suggested I should be grateful for her concern. "Though I hope you'll be reasonable about expectations." That was my cue. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the manila envelopes I'd prepared the night before, one for each family member present. Laid them out across the white tablecloth like I was dealing cards. "Actually," I said, "I filed for separation this morning, but there's something else you should probably know about." The table went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people enjoying good food and wine, but the suspicious quiet of people who'd just realized they'd missed something important. Richard picked up his envelope first, opened it, and began reading. I watched the color drain from his face as he processed the legal language, the property transfer documentation, the county filing stamps that made everything official. What is this supposed to mean?" Eleanor asked, her voice climbing toward hysteria as she scanned her own copy. "It means," Marcus read aloud, stumbling over the legal phrasing, "that full ownership of the estate has been transferred to Jake, effective immediately upon legal separation from Melissa." Derek looked confused. "But that was just supposed to be temporary, right? Like, A placeholder thing while the lawyers handled the other stuff? I nodded calmly. It was temporary, for exactly 6 months, just like Richard requested. But then, Melissa posted her selfie. I filed for separation, and Clause 7.3 activated automatically. Richard was still staring at the document like it might burst into flames. That clause. There wasn't supposed to be. Page 7, paragraph 3, I said. Initialed by both you and Melissa. Notarized and witnessed. Everything completely legal and above board. Eleanor stood so fast her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. You manipulated them. You added language that wasn't in the original agreement. I added protection for myself to a legal document I was signing. That's what adults do when they read contracts carefully. Marcus leaned forward, his face flushed with wine and indignation. You knew this whole time. You were planning this. I was prepared for this. There's a difference. The room erupted into voices. Accusations, threats, demands for explanations that wouldn't change anything. But underneath all the noise, I could see the exact moment each of them understood the magnitude of what had happened. The Westbrook family legacy, the property that represented generations of wealth and status, the lakefront estate where they'd hosted fundraisers and impressed business contacts and built their entire social identity. All of it now belonged to the blue-collar son-in-law they'd spent 12 years treating like hired help. Richard finally found his voice, though it came out smaller than his usual commanding tone. The lawyers will contest this. There are ways to challenge document fraud, coercion. With what evidence? I asked. You requested the transfer. You provided the legal framework. You signed the documents after having them reviewed by your own attorney. Everything was filed properly through official channels. But you knew, Eleanor whispered. When you signed those papers, you knew Melissa was having an affair. I suspected she was unhappy, but I didn't know anything for certain until she decided to announce her upgrade to the entire internet. Derek was still flipping through his copy, like there might be a different ending hidden in the back pages. So you actually own everything now? The house, the land, the dock? Every square inch. And according to the original trust language your father insisted on, ownership cannot be transferred back to family members for a minimum of 5 years without facing significant tax penalties. Richard's lawyer had designed that clause to prevent them from moving the property around too quickly and attracting IRS attention. Now it worked against them, locking me in as owner whether they liked it or not. The rest of dinner was a masterclass in uncomfortable silence, broken by occasional outbursts of impotent rage. I finished my meal, complimented Eleanor on the salmon preparation, and excused myself like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. "This isn't over," Richard called after me as I reached the front door. "Family doesn't abandon family, Jake. We'll find a way to work this out." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "You're right, Richard. Family doesn't abandon family. But I was never really family to you, was I? I was just the help with a ring." The phone calls started that night and continued for 3 days straight. First Melissa, sobbing and screaming and cycling through the 5 stages of grief at light speed. Then her mother, alternating between guilt trips and legal threats. Marcus tried to negotiate, offering money we both knew they didn't have. Even Derek called, suggesting I might want to think about the optics of the situation. But the most revealing call came from Richard himself on Wednesday evening. "Jake," he said, and his voice sounded older than I'd ever heard it. "I know you're angry. I know we haven't always appreciated you the way we should have. But destroying our family legacy isn't going to bring Melissa back." "This isn't about bringing her back," I replied. "This is about consequences." "What do you want? Money? An apology? A partnership in the business?" "I want you to understand something, Richard. For 12 years, you treated me like a servant you occasionally allowed to sit at the family table. You made jokes about my education, my income, my background. You introduced me to your friends as Melissa's husband like I didn't have a name or identity beyond that." He was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe we could have been more inclusive. And now your daughter has posted a photo of herself in another man's bed with the caption, 'Upgrading,' like our entire marriage was just a rough draft she was ready to revise. So yes, I'm upgrading too. To what? To someone who owns a $4.3 million lakefront estate instead of someone who trims hedges for a living. But here's the thing about revenge. The best kind doesn't end with you keeping what you've taken. The best kind ends with you giving it away to people who deserve it more than anyone involved in the original conflict." Thursday morning, I drove to the estate for the first time as its legal owner. The gates opened automatically when they recognized my truck. Richard had added me to the security system months earlier as part of the property management transition. I parked in the circular driveway where I'd once felt awkward and out of place, and walked through the front door with keys that were finally officially legally mine. The house was exactly as I remembered it. Gorgeous, expensive, and completely devoid of anything that felt like home. Persian rugs over hardwood floors, abstract art that cost more than most people's cars. Furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a place where real people lived real lives. I spent 2 hours walking through every room, not from nostalgia but from necessity, because I was about to give it all away, and I wanted to remember exactly what I was choosing not to keep. My grandfather had fought in World War II, came home with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that lasted 40 years. He used to bring other veterans to a little cabin he'd built on a different lake, said the quiet water helped them remember how to sleep without dreaming of artillery shells. He died when I was 16, but I'd never forgotten his stories about those men sitting on his dock at dawn, finally finding some peace. By Friday morning, I'd established the Thompson Veterans Trust, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to providing retreat services for combat veterans dealing with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and adjustment disorders. The paperwork was complex, but Catherine Morrison had connections with nonprofit specialists who understood the legal requirements. The property transfer took exactly 47 minutes to process. One signature changed everything from a personal revenge story to a legacy that would help people who'd actually earned the right to find peace on that beautiful lakefront. Saturday afternoon, Melissa showed up at the gates in her white BMW, the same car her father had co-signed for because she'd never been financially responsible enough to qualify for the loan herself. She punched in the old security code, got no response, and tried again with increasing frustration. I watched from the porch as she finally got out of the car and started shouting at the intercom system like it might respond to volume instead of proper authorization. The new security company had installed better cameras, so I had a clear view of her face cycling through confusion, anger, and the first hints of real panic. When the guard came out of the gatehouse, she launched into what I assume was supposed to be an explanation of her rightful access to the property. But she wasn't on the authorization list anymore, and he was just doing his job when he told her she'd need written permission from the current owner to enter. "I'm his wife!" she screamed, loud enough that I could hear her through the closed windows. "Not according to our records, ma'am. Legal separation was filed Monday morning." I walked down to the gate, not to gloat, but to deliver the final piece of information she needed to understand her new reality. "The property has been transferred to a nonprofit trust," I told her through the bars that now separated us in more ways than one. "The Thompson Veterans Trust, combat veterans who need a quiet place to heal." She stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. "You gave it away?" "I gave it to people who've actually sacrificed something for others." Her face went through several expressions: confusion, rage, disbelief, and finally something that might have been understanding. She wasn't just locked out of the property. She was locked out of the story entirely. There was no revenge narrative she could spin, no sufferer role she could play, because I hadn't kept anything for myself. "You could have had millions," she said quietly. "We could have worked something out." "I don't want millions, Melissa. I wanted respect. And when that wasn't available, I settled for justice." She got back in her car and drove away without another word. I haven't heard from her since, though I know through Tyler that she's moved in with her upgrade permanently and started a lifestyle blog about finding yourself through authentic living. The Westbrook family made one final legal attempt to challenge the property transfer, but their attorney explained what mine had already told me. Charitable trusts are almost impossible to reverse, especially when all the original paperwork was filed correctly and the donors signed willingly. Richard called one last time, 3 weeks after the trust became operational. "I hope you understand what you've cost our family," he said. "I understand exactly what it cost," I replied. "The same thing it cost me when you decided I wasn't worth treating like an equal for 12 years. And you think this makes you the better man?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. "No, Richard. It makes me the man who read what he was signing." The Thompson Veterans Trust has hosted its first retreat weekend. 12 combat veterans, ages ranging from 24 to 67, spent 3 days learning to fish, sitting quietly on the dock and talking about things they'd never felt safe discussing anywhere else. Watching them find some peace in that place gave me more satisfaction than owning it ever could have. Tyler asked me last week if I regretted any of it. The marriage, the planning, the nuclear option I'd activated with such surgical precision. Do you regret reading the contract? I asked him back. What do you mean? In life, people are going to hand you documents and assume you won't read them carefully. They'll count on your gratitude, your trust, your assumption that they have your best interests in mind, and most of the time, maybe they do. I handed him a copy of his college application, which he'd filled out but not submitted yet. But sometimes they don't. And the only protection you have is understanding exactly what you're agreeing to before you sign your name. He read through the entire application before submitting it, including the fine print about financial aid and academic requirements. Smart kid. He's going to do just fine. As for me, I'm back to landscaping other people's yards and driving my dented truck and living in the same house where this all started. But now when I trim hedges, I'm thinking about the next group of veterans who'll sit on that dock and remember what peace feels like. Melissa posted upgrading and thought she was writing the end of our story. Turns out she was just giving me permission to write a better one.